Welcome to the February 2022 meeting of the Symmes Township Board of Zoning Appeals. We do have a quorum consisting of 3 permanent members and 2 alternates. Too many of us are already traveling in Florida or something, having a good time. The rest of us are stuck here in the snow. Feel free to join us as we stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Fowler?
Here.
Ms. Harlan?
Here.
Mr. Horvath? Mr. Tripp?
Here.
Mr. Wolf? Mr. Duke?
Here.
Mr. Jameson?
Here.
Thank you. This meeting is being recorded for the public record and is subject to media and public access. We, this board, are appointed by the township's publicly elected trustees, but we are only normal citizens appointed to this role. Anything we do is subject to appeal, so don't think of us as a final decision on much of anything. Our decision-making authority is limited, and our decisions on a case require the affirmative vote of 3 of our members, and that's the 5 members. Sometimes we have less than that attending. It's still a 3-member requirement. In this case, you're getting the full benefit of 3 out of 5 votes. Does anyone on this board propose any additions or corrections to the agenda? Does anyone on the board need to address a possible conflict of interest?
I do.
Okay.
I live in the neighborhood that's the subject of tonight's hearing. I know we're being asked for a question of law, more in that area than a specific property. But if anybody wants to recuse me, this is probably the time to do it.
We'll allow the public to make a comment about that if someone wants to object, but it has never been grounds for the board to say, we think you should recuse yourself. So I don't think any of us are asking you to do that. But if anyone in the audience...
Typically, this is a question of, do you stand to gain monetarily from the outcome of this decision, and do you feel that you can render a decision impartially? It's not a popularity contest for the residents in the attendance in the audience. This is a question merely for Ms. Harlow, if she feels that she can be impartial.
Yeah.
And I do.
Okay.
Unless there is an objection from anybody in attendance or on the board.
Okay.
So, Brian,
And let's...
the agenda has to be posted.
Yeah, let's talk again about the agenda. There's a motion to be made about the agenda, is there?
Should we move the election of officers to next month? Or do we do that
Is that a
today?
motion?
I move. We have to elect our board officers.
Okay.
So,
I think the situation is that attending tonight are 3 permanent board members and 2 alternates. And I'm the current chairman. And if we were to choose to elect somebody who's not here, that would be unfair to that person who could say, I refuse to serve. And for that reason, we're considering whether to move that election to next meeting. That's her motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before you do any motions or vote on any motions, actually, some of these folks need to be administered an oath of office before they can.
Have they not been?
we're a little bit, that's a little bit further down the agenda, I think.
No, it's actually right after the pledge is the oath of office.
Oh.
Does anybody have the oath? Okay. Okay.
And either I can do that. Actually,
Did you want to do that?
it doesn't, I don't know how you've handled them in the past.
Have you ever done it?
Oh, yeah.
Do it again.
It shows how it's done.
Okay.
There are three. My understanding is there are three of you, right? You can just stand right there.
There are Joel Deutsch, Gary Trick, and Kevin Jameson.
So,
Gary is a permanent member.
okay. We'll just do this all at the same time. I'm going to say aye, state your name. You just all state your name. And then you can all repeat the rest after me. Okay? Sure. All right. So I'll ask you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Joel Deutsch,
Gary Trick,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the
of
Constitution
the United States of America
of the United States of America
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and I will faithfully discharge
the duties of a member
the duties of a member
of the Board of Zoning Appeals
of the Board of Zoning Appeals
of Symmes Township, Hamilton County, Ohio,
of Symmes Township, Hamilton County,
to
Ohio,
which I have been appointed.
to which I have been appointed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And then before some of you leave, we'll get you to sign these.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now you have.
We also have something that they sign.
I have it right here. I'll make
Okay.
sure it happens before.
All right, sure. Okay.
I move that we approve the agenda.
As written,
As written?
hold the election now?
Oh,
Hold the
no.
election tonight?
No, I thought
You
we
would-
carried the motion. I'm sorry.
But we didn't vote on it.
Okay, yes.
Okay. So you've moved to defer the election of officers to the next meeting.
Yes. Sure.
Gary has seconded it. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes unanimously. Okay. As amended, is the agenda approved?
Yes.
You move to approve the agenda?
Yes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We've sworn in, and we're now hearing an appeal. The appeal we are hearing tonight is BZA 2022-01, Yi Wing Chang and Jared Tucker at 10112 Meadow Knoll Drive, a short-term rental interpretation by the zoning inspector.
Do you want to swear everybody in at once, or do you want to swear them in one at a time as they come up?
Swear everybody in at once.
Do you want me to do that
No.
with the chair? Okay.
Okay. Anyone who wishes to testify or speak publicly tonight, please stand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth in everything you say before this board today?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, who do we hear from first?
Good evening, Brian Snyder, Hamilton County Zoning Administrator. I prepared the report that you should have for this case. This is a little different, which is interesting because we have three new board members. Almost none of our cases are ever like this one. So this is an outlier. I don't remember the last time we've heard an appeal of an administrative interpretation such as this. This is the first time I've written one of these staff reports. I had to create the format from scratch because I can't find an example of it even for the county. It's not something that typically occurs. So I'll go in a little bit more depth than I typically do. The staff report has this all explained, the background, the powers of the board, the interpretation, and the appellant's rebuttal of that interpretation, their letter that they've submitted with the appeal. So the Board of Zoning Appeals is authorized by the zoning resolution to hear and decide appeals where it is alleged there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an administrative official in the enforcement of this resolution. That's the power that's granted to you, and as such, there has to be an application process for that. The appellant has made that application for an appeal of a specific interpretation related to short-term rentals, which occurred after a zoning violation at 10112 Meadow Knoll Drive. The zoning interpretation that is being appealed is an interpretation from the zoning administrator for Symmes Township, Kim Lepensi, Township Administrator. related to short-term rental uses being considered as part of the use category of bed and breakfast. The zoning administrator's interpretation was related to a specific complaint that was received for a bed and breakfast, or an Airbnb, I'm sorry, a short-term rental being operated at 10112 Meadow Knoll Drive. In reviewing the Airbnb website and the VRBO website, the zoning inspector for Symmes Township determined that the property was being used as a short-term rental, and short-term rentals being classified as bed and breakfasts require conditional use approval by this board, which the appellant had not applied for or received approval of. So there was a zoning violation that was sent out stating that they were using the property as a short-term rental without the appropriate Board of Zoning Appeals conditional use approval. That there were some letters that went back and forth between the attorney for the homeowner and the township, which precipitated the official interpretation from Kim Lipinski, which is a part of the packet that you received, a part of the staff report that I prepared. So that was that interpretation was sent to the appellant and their attorney, and that is the official interpretation of the administrator that is being appealed tonight. As I stated, you have the power to hear an appeal. In appeals such as this, the interpretation is not specific to 10112 Meadow Knoll Drive. This is an interpretation of the zoning resolution as it relates to these types of uses. So what you're being asked to do is to determine whether or not you agree with the interpretation of the administrator or you disagree with the interpretation of the administrator. This does not have the effect of approving or denying the specific use of this property as an Airbnb. It's not the case that is before you, the staff report that was written. None of these things relate specifically to 10112 Meadow Knoll Drive, but they don't relate specifically to that because this is an interpretation of the code as a whole. This would apply and does currently apply to every short-term rental in the entire township. So your decision as to whether or not you agree with the administrator has an implication on the entire township, not just this one property. If you decide that you agree with the interpretation, then the short-term rentals in Symmes Township would be considered bed and breakfasts and would be required to go through conditional use approval process. The appellant has in their letter has argued that these type of facilities should be just considered the same as single-family residence and should be permitted in any single-family residential property. If you agree with that, as stated in the staff report, single-family homes are permitted in single-family, or single-family uses are permitted in single-family homes. So nobody would need to get conditional use approval or a zoning certificate to operate a bed and breakfast in any property in Symmes Township in any zoning district, any residential zoning district. They're arguing it's the same as you moving into your house. You didn't get approval to move into your house. You didn't have to have anybody, you didn't have to have a hearing or have anybody approve that. You just moved in. And that is what they're arguing that bed and breakfast should be. I'm not going to read the entire interpretation. Obviously, the appellant is here. The attorney for the appellant is here. He can argue the opposite side of that that was submitted as part of this appeal. I did want to go into just a couple other sections of the staff report. The zoning resolution gives the Board of Zoning Appeals the power to reverse or affirm, wholly or partly, or modify the order, requirement, decision, or determination appealed from, and may make such order, requirement, decision, or determination as ought to be made, and that to that end shall have all powers of the officer from whom the appeal is taken. Essentially, that means you have you have the power of the zoning administrator to affirm or reverse or modify the order that was issued by the zoning administrator that was appealed to you. So you can change. You have the same powers that you typically do for variances. You can approve, deny, or modify, and that's the case in this situation as well. The point of the hearing tonight, as I stated, is not to discuss the merits of whether a bed and breakfast on Meadow Knoll specifically should be permitted. However, because the decision has ramifications on the entire township, any comments or discussions or questions that you may have, or anybody in the audience may have, related to the impacts of bed and breakfasts on single-family neighborhoods as a whole. You may consider that in determining whether or not you agree with the interpretation of the administrator. So to that point, I want to read the interpretation so that it's clear how this interpretation was made and the evidence supporting this interpretation. So due to the nature of ever-changing use categories as time progresses, it is impossible for any zoning code or resolution to always anticipate every type of possible use in any jurisdiction. Accordingly, interpretations related to the use categories of new uses not specifically defined in the code must be made. Such is the case with the short-term rental, vacation rental properties, such as homes and dwellings that are listed on Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, etc., for rent on a short-term basis. Such uses are not specifically defined in the Symmes Township zoning resolution. Therefore, official interpretation for Symmes Township is that such uses shall be categorized as part of the bed and breakfast use category. This is supported by the definitions of family, residential use, and residential single-family detached, which read,
Excuse me, may I interrupt you? Could you,
Yes, sir.
for clarification, tell us exactly what section so we can read along with you?
Sure,
that
this
possible?
is on page 4 of the staff report. It should have a SBZA staff report, January 3rd, 2022.
Right. Would it be in here?
It's part of the packet that was sent out today, yeah.
He's,
front.
he's looking at the Symmes Township ordinance. He was asking for what section to refer to there.
I see. And what page again, please?
Oh, from the actual zoning code?
From this, the staff report.
Or is that the staff report looks like this? This is the front page of the staff report.
Okay. What-
It should have been part of the packet that was mailed or emailed to you by Ms. Felter.
If you don't have it, I can hand you mine.
You sure, Jen? Okay. Thank you.
So at the bottom of page 4 of the staff report, the letter dated November 5th, 2021, the definition of family states that a person or group of persons occupying a premises and living as a single housekeeping unit, but as distinguished from a group occupying a boarding house, fraternity, sorority, hotel, or other type of contractual living quarters. Residential use is defined as a home, abode, dwelling unit, or place where a family or individuals live, where such a place has areas for living and eating within the structure. This category includes, but is not limited to, single-family detached units in PUDs, clustered patio dwelling and zero lot line, multifamily units, manufactured or mobile homes, as well as uses such as bed and breakfast facilities, granny cottages, residential facilities, and daycare type A. And then finally, the definition of residential single-family detached, a dwelling designed for and occupied by not more than one family. The term is defined in this article and surrounded by open space or yards, and which has no roof, wall, or floor in common with any other dwelling unit. So short-term vacation rental properties are the most similar to a type of other contractual living quarters when viewed in context with the definition of family. Since this definition eliminates a list of uses from the types of groups living as a single housekeeping unit, one of these other types of uses must apply. The definition of residential use clearly indicates that any type of residence is considered a residential use facilities, but also including multifamily uses that are not permitted in single-family zoning districts. Single-family zoning districts in Symmes Township permit single-family residential uses. The definition of single-family residential refers back to the definition of family, which excludes other types of contractual living quarters. Therefore, short-term vacation rentals do not fall into this classification of single-family residential and are therefore not permitted as of right in single-family residence zoning districts. In reviewing the resolution as it relates to other types of contractual living quarters, including bed and breakfast, boarding house, fraternity, sorority, and hotel, it was determined that considering them as other types of contractual living quarters offers the interpretation that is most favorable to the property owners. The most favorable type of other contractual living quarter in this case is bed and breakfast, which is defined as a private owner-occupied residence with 1 to 3 guest rooms contained within the structure and operated so that guests reside at the home for not longer than 2 continuous weeks. No kitchen facilities may be provided for use by guests. While short-term rental uses do not fit neatly into this definition, as evidenced by the fact that these are often not owner-occupied and there are typically kitchen facilities for the guests, this definition serves to differentiate these types of uses from the definition of hotel or motel, which is defined as a building containing more than 4 individual rooms for the purpose of providing for periods not exceeding 30 days overnight lodging facilities to the general public for compensation with or without meals, and which has common facilities for reservation cleaning services, combined utilities, and on-site management and reception. While hotels and motels are types of uses that are prohibited in single-family residence zoning districts, bed and breakfast uses are permissible. Bed and breakfast uses are permissible in single-family residence districts as a conditional use. Since the majority of short-term rentals uses are located in areas zoned for single-family residence, this classification offers the least restrictive zoning approval process and has been deemed to be use category most favorable to individual property owners. Accordingly, short-term rental uses shall be interpreted to be included in the category of bed and breakfast for the purpose of zoning administration and may be permitted in single-family zoning districts only upon approval of a conditional use by the Symmes Township Board of Zoning Appeals. So the references back and forth between all the definitions that are in the zoning resolution come back to the original definition of family, which separates out several types of living situations from what can be considered single family, and one of those being contractual living quarters. Residential use does not apply in this case, other than to say that this is a residential use. Short-term rentals are a residential use, just like multifamily units and other uses that are not permitted in single-family districts. Also similar to granny cottages, residential facilities, daycare centers, or other uses that are permissible in residential districts as a conditional use. So this wouldn't be the only conditional use, and because of the fact that it would be a conditional use, it's permissible in single-family zoning districts, so it's deemed to be the least restrictive. And that was the basis for the interpretation made by the zoning administrator in this case. I know that's a lot. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
I have one. So regardless of what we decide tonight, what is the logistical outcome?
Very good. So to go back to the powers of the board, you do have the power to hear an appeal, and this is differentiated from a variance or a conditional use by the fact that variances, whether they're use variances or area variances, have practical difficulties or hardships that must be considered. There are factors for those, for both of those standards and factors. Conditional uses have conditions that must be met, the list of conditions that you go through and determine whether or not they're consistent. Appeal is really, has none of those. There are no factors to consider, and there are no specific standards. So you are reading the plain language that was presented to you by the zoning administrator and hearing the testimony of everybody in attendance, along with the case of the appellant, and you are making the decision as to whether or not you do or don't agree with the interpretation. So your choices are: you can agree wholly with the interpretation of the zoning administrator, you can agree wholly with the appellant in their case, or you can find a different, you can modify what the zoning administrator said. In this case, because we're dealing with use categories, short-term rental uses are a use. They have to be addressed in some way through zoning. And so there has to be a category that you would put them into. If you disagreed with the bed and breakfast category, your decision would need to state some other type of use that you would consider them to be most similar as, and how they should be considered by the zoning staff moving forward. So that's the affirm, reverse, or modify the appeal. Those are the 3 options.
It's hard to follow everything you read, and what I'm trying to understand is how our ordinance works. for conditional use, there are 4 categories that you can fit into and apply for a conditional use. There are also use restrictions, I assume, throughout the code, inherent in the code, that say you can't do this particular use, a particular use, unless it's permitted by the zoning ordinance for the category of the property you're looking at. So it's not just a matter of, is a Airbnb permitted by the code by fitting into one of these 4 categories for conditional use. You can be a hotel and be prohibited in a single-family zoning classification. You could be maybe an Airbnb and be prohibited or permitted. It's not just an issue of being a conditional use. You can read the plain language.
I didn't mention the conditional use at all. I didn't intend to say that you had to choose a category that makes it a conditional use. The interpretation that I read was the interpretation as it was written by the zoning administrator.
You may not have said the words conditional use, but bed and breakfast is a category of conditional use. We wouldn't be talking about an Airbnb if it were a bed and breakfast.
Correct. Yes, that's true.
So you're putting the whole argument in the category of conditional use. The question is an Airbnb, the question I have is an Airbnb somehow otherwise absolutely permitted by the ordinance for a single-family residence, or is it prohibited?
Currently, it's neither, and that's the point of the interpretation. I'm sorry, currently it is a bed and breakfast, because as of today, the interpretation of the zoning administrator still stands. Unless you overturn it as part of this appeal, that interpretation has been made. So today, it's being interpreted that these uses are bed and breakfasts and have to go through the conditional use process because of that administrative interpretation. Before you, though, is the question of whether you agree with that interpretation. And one of your options, as I stated, was that you can pick a different category that you think it fits better into. So if you as a board decide that it's
It doesn't necessarily have to fit into a conditional use category.
I didn't say it did. You can choose that you can,
Well,
as a board, agree.
Let's call it an Airbnb category.
That would take a code amendment, so you can't change the
Well,
code through this process.
I'm not amending conditional use.
No. You can't add words to the zoning resolution through this process. You can only, that's why there's an interpretation to begin with, because the code doesn't actually have the definition of short-term rental. That takes a text amendment, which the trustees and the zoning commission have the authority to initiate, which I believe they're actually considering doing something like that sometime soon. But that's a process that's outside of this meeting.
The point.
You can't make up a category of Airbnb
You're ignoring
tonight.
my question. My question is, ignore conditional use in the categories that include bed and breakfast. That may be totally irrelevant. My question is, what in the code is there about being an Airbnb or conducting some other business in a single-family residence area? Is this permitted or forbidden? We always sit here and hear appeals about what somebody wants to do with their property that may be used as a business. We have heard that more than once in my term. And
I've never presented a case to you where somebody wanted to come in and use any of their residential properties for a business. That's a use variance. That's not something that I've ever had before the board.
it's prohibited, right?
Correct, yes.
So if you're an Airbnb and you're running a business, is
So-
it not possible that the code provides that that's prohibited?
So the code has categories, right? Every zoning district has categories of permissible uses. Okay, so in the category of permissible in the list of permissible uses for the the e-residence with retail district, there is auto sales and service as a permitted use in the e-retail district. And in the A district, it doesn't list that use. So if you're doing that use, you go through the code, you find your use, it tells you where you are allowed to do it. And if it doesn't say you're allowed to do it in that district, then you're not allowed to do it in that district.
Doesn't that answer the issue before us?
There is no definition or category anywhere in the code that says Airbnb. And when that case occurs, when we have a use that is not listed specifically in the code, the zoning administrator's job is to make an interpretation as to what category a new type of use fits into. Typically, you address it as part of a future text amendment where you add that use. If you feel like it's something that's going to come up and you need a definition of it, you add that to the code. But that doesn't account for the fact that the uses do come up that weren't anticipated when the zoning resolution was written, and that the zoning administrator has the authority to make an interpretation as to where that use should fit into the code. So in this
That's what I'm
case,
questioning is why that interpretation? An Airbnb is a business.
you can make that case. Bed and breakfasts are a business as well.
Right, and that's
it's-
a special category for conditional use. I don't
Right.
see Airbnb in the conditional use provisions of this ordinance. And if you're talking about an Airbnb being a business, which in many places in Ohio require a business license, an Airbnb, that's prohibited by the code in a single-family residential district. I'm at a loss as to why we're talking about a classification for a bed and breakfast in a conditional use category when this may be prohibited, unless you tell me I'm wrong, by the code itself, irrespective of conditional use.
So-
Before Brian says anything, I'm gonna jump in, and I want to make something clear. As the attorney here, what I'm about to say is not testimony. I don't want you to take it as testimony. What I would like to do is provide a procedural clarification about what we're doing here. Because I hear the questions that you're asking Brian, and I want to try to frame that in what's the purpose of what you're doing here tonight. You're not trying to decide why did the zoning administrator come up with this interpretation about making short-term rentals, classifying them as a bed and breakfast. That was the determination that the zoning administrator made. The question before this board is, as Brian pointed out, and again, this is just, I'm only saying this as a procedural clarification. The question before this board is, do you agree with that interpretation, yes or no? That's the only question before this board. If you agree with the zoning administrator's interpretation that Airbnbs or short-term rentals should be classified under bed and breakfast, you would agree with the interpretation. If you disagree with that for any reason, then you would vote against upholding that. So I just want to be clear that, and as Brian pointed out, this board has the authority to either affirm that decision, reverse that decision, or modify that decision. And by modifying that decision, you could say, we disagree that it falls under the category of bed and breakfast, and we think it falls under the category of fill in the blank, whatever this board were to determine. So Brian's not going to be able to answer the question, why are we talking about this? The only reason why we're talking about this is because that was the decision that the zoning administrator came up with, and this board has to decide if you agree with it or disagree with it.
Okay.
Sorry.
You took it that extra step to that third choice that he was talking about. We can agree, we can disagree, or we can say it's some other animal.
Yes, that's, yes.
Are we looking?
Does that other animal have to be one of the four categories?
No, again.
The concern is are we making up law then? If we're
Again,
creating a new category?
I want to be clear, again, what I'm telling you right now is not testimony, it's not factual.
Right, we understand.
I just want, but I need it to be clear
It's part of the
for the
analysis we have
record.
to go through.
You don't have to make this there's some confusion, I think, that this has to be some conditional use. It does not. If you agree with the zoning administrator's interpretation, you would affirm it. If you disagree, you could reject it. If you were to modify it, you could say that short-term rentals, Airbnbs, are more appropriately classified as another use. I'm not saying it has to be one of those conditional uses, but it does have to be a use that's already identified in the zoning resolution. You can't make up something new.
Right.
That is a job for a future text amendment of the trustees if they choose to do that. You are limited with the confines of the code here. So if you want to say it's more appropriate as a different use category, you have the authority to do that, but it has to be an existing use category.
Okay. And when you say that, we're not necessarily saying it is as a category in the conditional use definition. It can be another animal, like simply a business activity.
If that's what this board concludes.
Okay. Great.
Sorry to jump in.
No, that helps. That really helps. Does anyone else have a question for the staff?
I have a question. Could you review for me the process that you went through that led you to this conclusion that it was an Airbnb? Besides, well, I'd like to know what you were thinking. What did you see? What led you to this point?
The interpretation was written by Kim Lipinski, the zoning administrator for the township. So I didn't write or transmit this this interpretation in total. I did participate in a group with the attorney for the township and the administrator in making this determination as a bed and breakfast. In reviewing similar zoning resolutions in Hamilton County, it seems that the townships that have addressed this have created a short-term rental category and have called them bed and breakfast, made them go through the same criteria as the bed and breakfast to address this concern. So, for instance, Anderson Township has recently gone through a text amendment to add short-term rental as a type of use in their zoning resolution, and they made them go through the same conditional use criteria, the same exact list of criteria as bed and breakfasts do. So they've basically called them a bed and breakfast, but defined them separately and made them go through the same criteria. Most vacation rental houses are in single-family residential neighborhoods, so not allowing them in single-family residential neighborhoods probably prohibits them effectively prohibits them in most areas of the township. There aren't very many houses, single-family houses, that are zoned for retail or office use in Symmes Township. So in offering an opportunity for these types of uses to request approval in a single-family district, knowing that conditional use approvals require notification of everybody within 200 feet of the property, so there is a public hearing, the neighbors get a chance to be heard before such use is approved, so that it's not that somebody just moves in and starts operating a bed and breakfast next door without anybody knowing about it. Before you would be allowed to do that, you would have to go through the conditional use and have a hearing, and the neighbors would have to be notified. They'd have a chance to say their piece. It seemed to me anyway, as part of my involvement in reviewing this, the most logical category that they would fit into, this type of use would fit into. That being said, that's my personal involvement in this. As I said, I didn't sign this letter and send it to the attorney. Kim Lipinski did. I can't speak for her as to what her thought process or reasoning was for why she sent the letter or made this the official interpretation of the township, but that's my involvement in that process.
Thank you. Was there an on-site inspection?
An on-site inspection, the zoning inspector has been there several times. We reviewed photographs, but there's not much you can see from it. I believe that other people in the township also looked at the listings on Airbnb, on VRBO. So there were pictures of it and the description and, the typical VRBO listing.
For a private owner of this residence who wishes it to be an Airbnb, what's needed? Certification? A license, a fee, or?
So this
license?
is zoning related. If the state requires you get a license to have people staying in your house, you still have to get that license, whether or not the township is involved in that process or not. We're not involved in that in zoning. This is strictly a land use. Are you allowed to do it, or are you not allowed to do it? And if you are, what conditions are applied to this process? So if the board were to approve any use, and then the state required licensing, you approving the use doesn't relieve them from the requirement that they need to be licensed in accordance with the state. State licensing requirements are completely separate from zoning.
Thank you.
I have no further questions, please, Ryan.
Ryan, I have no questions. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we actually have an applicant here that
Yes.
I'm dealing with? No, I mean, is that the procedure?
Yes.
Okay. The applicant may approach the podium and speak, please. Your name and address?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Trout. I am the attorney for the applicants. By the way, thank you for spending your time, your evening with us tonight, and congratulations to those who were just sworn in. You all play a very important role. It's tedious, it's time-consuming, and municipalities and townships couldn't operate without you, so thank you. This appeal arises out of a notice of a zoning violation, as discussed earlier. It was improperly issued because this is a rental property, okay? There are a few things that I want to address that have been discussed that might be able to clear up a few things and a few questions. The property in question is owned by two individuals. It is not owned by a company, okay? It's not owned by Airbnb. It's not operated by Airbnb. Airbnb is merely just a listing platform. It's no different than listing a rental property on Zillow. It's no different than listing a rental property on Realtor.com through a realtor like Keller Williams on their website. It's no different. It's just a listing platform that also helps with the process of payment as well. There's also the property in question is also not just a short-term rental. It's also rented for several months at a time. And it can be, there is no limitation on how long it can be rented. This property is not a bed and breakfast by the definition of the current zoning code. Therefore, it doesn't fit in one of the conditional use requirements. It is a single-family residence. That's what it's being utilized as. By definition, a bed and breakfast in the zoning code, and that's what you have to work from. If you're calling it a bed and breakfast, you have to work within the confines of the current zoning code and ordinances and the definitions therein. The current definition of a bed and breakfast is a private owner-occupied residence with 1 to 3 guest rooms contained within that structure and operated so that guests reside at the home for not longer than 2 continuous weeks, period. No kitchen facilities may be provided for use by guests. Okay. The property in question. There is no limitation on how long someone can rent it. It can be continuous for more than 2 weeks. So that's strike one. The owners do not reside in the property. So that's strike two. The entire facility is rented, including the kitchen, to a single renter or a group of that renter, which fits within the definition of family, which I will get to in a second. There's no restrictions on the use of a kitchen, so that's strike three. And just to put the little cherry on top, individual rooms are not rented out to separate people. It's not like a hostel or a hotel where you could be living next door to a complete stranger. That's not the case here. Someone who books this home or rents this home is doing so for him or herself or a group of people with whom he or she is with. The letter, and as acknowledged, the official interpretation recognizes that it doesn't fit within this definition. In the terms of the letter, they say that it is the closest. I obviously disagree with that for the reasons just mentioned. There's 3 or 4 strikes there. It doesn't fit within the definition at all.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I understand your argument, how it doesn't fit within any of the parameters of the current issues of code. Do you see anywhere within the code that it does fit within that your client would have to meet in order for them to use the facility that homeowner wants to?
Yeah, and I think this answers your question, Mr. Fowler, as well. The current zoning code does not preclude this use. It's like any other rental property. If you required this property to submit as a bed and breakfast for conditional use, then you would also be requiring properties potentially on a month-to-month basis to fit within that category. It's just like any other family use rental. So someone owns a home, they sign a lease for a year. It's the same type of thing, same type of transaction. It is being utilized by a family. It is being rented by whether it be an owner, an individual, or a company. It falls squarely within the definition of family use, which is outlined in the letter. This.
Are you saying that this is a group of people in one housekeeping unit that's always renting these Airbnbs?
It is either a person or group of persons who are renting the home.
That are living as a single unit, as a single housekeeping unit? So you tell me it's all these families that are renting these properties?
No, so to be clear, and the zoning code properly does not define family as being one of blood relatives or marriage or.
It says one housekeeping unit.
Okay, and yes, it is within one house, a person or group of people within one house.
Could it be 2 families? If 2 different families would want to visit the area, there's multiple bedrooms presumably in this house, and one family lives in 2 bedrooms, and another family lives in the other 2 bedrooms.
It's possible, just like it is if there's an owner who says, hey, cousins, move in with me for however long until you get your financials figured out, or hey, friend, move in with me, you're going through a divorce, you can live with me for the next 6 months or whatever it may be. It would be no different than that.
I'm assuming, though, that there is some sort of contract that is executed when someone is operating it, whether it's an Airbnb or whether it's a VRBO, so there is some contractual relationship and money being exchanged between the owner of the home and who's residing in the home. Would that be a fair statement or not?
Of course, there would be monies exchanged for that, just like there would be for any other rental property, yes. And to be clear, this property doesn't just use VRBO or Airbnb either. It is also rented directly, and there are customers or renters who, I didn't mean to say customers, they're renters who come to the property owners directly and rent directly, just like any other rental. And so the definition of family, as you brought up, it is a person or group of persons occupying a premises and living as a single housekeeping unit, but not as distinguished from a group occupying a boarding house, fraternity/sorority, hotel, or other type of contractual living quarters. So the use of living quarters to define boarding house, fraternity/sorority, hotel, or other type of contractual living quarters, inherently different from a rental property. We're talking about an entire property being rented. No limitations on the use of that home. Again, as I stated earlier, there is complete access to the kitchen, which again was a strike. There's complete access to all of the rooms. There's not a room assignment, so when someone rents the property, they're not assigned room 101 or room 102 or given separate keys. They're given keys to the property as a whole.
Well, let's explore that just a minute. You're talking about the concept of occupying it as sort of a family unit, which may or may not be what we think of as a traditional family unit, but as a group for housekeeping purposes. And we're not talking about your client and their particular use or plan for this property. We're talking about definitionally the issue we are facing here today, an interpretation of the code. In the concept of what you describe as an Airbnb, you said the term is unlimited. It could be a year, like a typical rental. It could be multiple years. It could be months. It could be weeks. Could it be just one day? Could it be the weekend?
Yes. It could be.
Does a weekend sound like a housekeeping unit?
Yes.
A family?
Because it's a family, a group, a person, or a group of persons. under the
Setting up
household.
housekeeping for a weekend.
Well, and that does beg the question of whether the zoning code defines housekeeping. It doesn't. And neither does the zoning define a lot of these items that are used. It doesn't define a lot of the words that are used. And the part of zoning, and it was referenced earlier, there are several townships who recognize this lack of definition in zoning codes, and they go through the amendment process of making sure it applies to something. There is no zoning code in the Symmes Township that is directly addressing or calling what this property is being used as a bed and breakfast or anything other than a family use.
But there's nothing to keep them from doing that either.
Well, there would have to be an amendment process to change
Right,
the
they
zoning
can,
ordinance.
they can do that.
Sure. That's the correct process.
Right. We're not a legislative body. We're interpreting the code that we administer.
Right. And to be able to apply or fit it into the category, it has to fit the definition. And this isn't a process of trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You have to have a finding of, and you all are charged with finding whether it fits in the definition. And if it doesn't, and by the way, something I should start with is that it's well-established Ohio law, that if there is any ambiguities in the zoning code, that it must be strictly construed in favor of the property owner. Well-established Ohio law. Not
That's fine. I don't know that anybody's disputing that.
so
But
here.
let's talk about what we are trying to interpret here. We're trying to interpret whether, for ourselves, we agree with the zoning administrator's decision that it's a bed and breakfast for all purposes of the code. If we instead think it is a business activity that is possibly not permitted by the zoning ordinance, that it is of such a nature that it doesn't fit within permissible uses, and isn't something that we could approve of as a conditional use because it doesn't fit in one of the granny categories, bed and breakfast categories, or the other two categories.
In order to find that this would be a commercial activity such that it would need to be zoned commercially, there would have to essentially be a finding that all rental properties are commercial activity.
Not necessarily.
This-
Why would that be the case?
Because
A rental property that is advertised publicly in some manner seeking residents, that is available for a weekend or 2 days or 1 day for any term that can be handled by an agent as opposed to the property owner itself. Remember, we're not here talking about your client and their business activity. We're talking about the category and how it fits. And Airbnbs are often handled by agents and advertised, as this is. It's a business activity. Airbnbs in some locations, right here in Ohio, have to get a license. They have to be registered. They have to show certain insurance coverages. There's a lot going on here that's more than, oh, this is just like a family unit that's just renting short-term, just like a family unit that rents it for an entire year. A much different thing. I can rent my house out, if I'm not occupying it, to someone without having to go through that process as you have to do in many other jurisdictions. We're just trying to interpret this. It's possible our interpretation would fit you in a licensed business category that takes us out of conditional use, takes us into a different thing. I can understand your argument that we're not a bed and breakfast. I can't understand your argument that you're something that is something else that's just like renting the house of a single owner, renting it to one single occupant for long periods of time. We're talking about such short periods of time that time is critical.
Well, and a couple things. First, yes, rental properties, whether for a month, 6 months, a year, or however long, are oftentimes listed just as as this property was listed or is listed. It's very similar. And these are private owners, just like it would be yourself. These are individual owners, just like it would be yourself renting your home. As the zoning code applies, they are treated, they should be treated the same. If the issue is we want to, and let me actually back up. So we are on appeal for this particular citation of violation. So while, yes, you are interpreting the definitions and the interpretation of the township, it is being applied to this case, this particular matter. It is specific in this sense. Could it have impacts? Sure. But the way to address those impacts is by amending the zoning code. If that's what
No
the township
disagreement
wished
there.
to do, that is what needs to be done. And a decision just to arbitrarily try to fit it into something to preclude it is just that. It's arbitrary and capricious. And that's improper. If there are certain activities that aren't addressed by the zoning code that the township wants to preclude, it has to amend the zoning code.
Point taken. Did we interrupt you? Did you have more to present?
Yes.
You were interrupted with questions.
No.
I felt you weren't finished.
I welcome all questions.
Okay.
All of the statements that I've made for the purposes of you all to hear it, I would like to call my client to be able to answer questions and testify as well.
That's fine.
I will address her with questioning, and then we'll be done. She was sworn in at the beginning.
Yeah, she was sworn in.
As I said, I outlined several things as how this property does not fit within the definition of bed and breakfast. It does fit within the general definition of family use.
Okay, okay.
Eway, are you the owner of the property at 10112 Meadow Mill Drive?
Yes, I am with Jared
Excuse me, can you press the button in the middle of the mic if it's not green already?
Tucker. Okay.
Could you, let me
Can you hear me now?
It's for the record.
Oh, okay.
let me repeat the question so that we can get it on the record.
Okay.
Are you the owner of 10112 Meadow Mill Drive?
Yes, I am with Jared Tucker.
Do either you or Jared Tucker reside at the property?
No, this is a rental property for us.
Have either of you ever resided at the property?
No.
Is the property a rental?
Yes.
When you rent the property and the home, do you rent the entire house?
Yes, we rent it to one person and their family for the house.
So, to a person, a family, or a group of people?
Right.
You don't rent individual rooms within the
No,
home?
just one house to one person and who they associate with.
Are there any restrictions to the use of the kitchen?
No, they have access to the entire house.
Is there any restrictions or limitations on a time frame for how long someone may rent the property?
No, they can stay as long as they want. You know, they could stay for months, as when they're in between houses, or however long they want to stay.
Have you rented to individuals who are in between homes or looking for houses to purchase?
That is typically what has happened recently when people have sold their houses. They don't have a place to stay. They haven't found a next home yet, or their home is getting built. That is one of the reasons why people stay.
So if I'm hearing you, then you're saying it's not like a hotel where individual rooms are rented out and there could be a complete stranger in the room next door.
No, the people who are staying, they trust the people, so it's either their family, kids, grandparents, their extended family. It's someone they believe that they are living with. I mean, I don't think they're living with strangers.
Is the home being used as a bed and breakfast?
I don't believe so, based on the zoning code of Symmes Township.
Is it reasonable to consider the property a bed and breakfast?
Not per the zoning code currently.
Is there anything that I stated or anything else that you would like to add?
I think the only thing is, if we're interpreting based on the code currently, I personally believe it is a rental property and it's not meet the definition of the bed and breakfast. You know, I could go into details of who people are staying and reasons why they're staying, but it's kind of the only thing I have to say is I don't think it meets the current zoning definition, because that's what we're strictly interpreting right now.
That's all we have.
I have questions for you.
Sure.
Is there a minimum length of time that they need to rent the property?
I do have a minimum.
What is the minimum time?
It varies. So sometimes it's I don't know how much detail you want to hear, but sometimes it is a week, sometimes it is a month, sometimes it is 2 days.
So it varies.
It varies.
And then you said that this is families that are in there renting. Have you asked, do you get that specific in your rental application?
If I asked their family, yes, I asked for a list of everyone who is staying, and what they're telling me, and we have exterior monitoring to make sure that it is who they say they are.
Thank you for that. I have a couple questions. Again, would you clarify for me, how do you make your property what websites or what videos do you use to advertise that you have this property for rent, right?
I would say it is similar to rental. So I use the listing forms. I have my own website. I have referrals. I have realtors who send referrals to me, referrals from friends, family, that type of stuff.
To be more specific, when you say listing sites, what are those listing sites?
Sure. So right now I use Airbnb, VRBO, my own booking website online, peaceofhomestays.com, and also realtors. I don't have websites for that. That is just word of mouth through people, and also any other agents in a way, like people who represent them come to me.
So you do list it on an Airbnb website, correct?
Yes.
I had a question. What is the longest period of time that you've rented the property? And if so, have you utilized a lease agreement?
Yes. So anytime we rent with someone or somebody rents, there is a lease agreement we have.
What's the longest period of time that you've exercised?
I believe it was a few months. I think like 3 to 4 months.
Thank you.
I have one question. Like for the year of 2021,
Mm-hmm.
would you think that you had more or less than like 12, I would guess, tenants or family units that lived at your unit in your home, more or less than 12?
More or less than 12 groups who have stayed.
Right, through the whole year of 2021.
I would have to go back through my records and take a look, but I would guess probably more.
And one, I'm sorry, we'll follow up. Is there like a maintenance company that you have for someone to take care of the property?
No, we take care of the property ourselves.
You and the other co-owner?
Yes. For lawn care, we use the same person who does lawn care in the neighborhood. Like anything inside the property, we take care of ourselves.
So like a recent ice storm, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Was a lawn service hired to clear the driveway? Something?
No, that's something we would do ourselves.
Did you do that?
I mean,
I was not there.
You're saying she takes care of it. That's something that she and her co-owner would take care of.
I object to that because I believe there were other houses in the neighborhood that have not cleared their driveway. So I don't see how that is relevant to this.
This is Ohio.
A good deal of this is not relevant to the question that the board is considering.
So.
We were allowing you to do the dialogue you did because you chose to do that, and they're just reacting. So
Are there other questions then? Other questions from the board?
Okay.
For the long-term lease that you mentioned, do you require a notice before they exit the property?
Yes, they let me know.
Well, what is that notice?
I say they have to give me 3 to 4 weeks notice.
Okay, thanks.
If there are no other questions from the board, then I just have one question. I just wanted to make sure I understood something. So you're saying, no matter where it comes from, whether it's a listing site or referrals, but you always use some sort of rental contract?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members of the public who would like to speak.
Good evening, my name is Kyle Watts. My family and I live at 11993 Streamside Drive. It's a single-family home on the corner of Bend Creek and Streamside. We've lived there for 11 years as a housekeeping unit, and we've enjoyed the comfortable and safe neighborhood for raising our kids. Thank you in advance for the time to talk tonight, and again, appreciate what you guys do for the township. I fully realize the topic for tonight is the Meadow Knoll property, but it is overall much bigger than that. I wanted to make sure that it's extremely important for the township and the zoning board to understand and are fully aware of the rapidly growing short-term rental activity in our neighborhoods. These properties' primary and only uses are by definition commercial activity. Per zoning code, commercial activity is an occupation, employment, or enterprise which is carried out for the profit of the owner, lessee, or licensee. This is not the only property that is a short-term rental property in our neighborhood. 10112 Meadow Knoll being discussed tonight is an active rental property, short-term rental property to be clear. As of last week, 10007 Bent Creek is now an active short-term rental property. 11922 North Lebanon Road is an active short-term rental property. All of these listings were active as of last night when I checked. The Meadow Knoll and Bent Creek properties are listed on Airbnb as well as VRBO. Other sites have been used in the past to list the Meadow Knoll property. Currently, the Meadow Knoll and the Bent Creek property only require a 2-night stay minimum. These properties seem to be purchased for the sole purpose of running short-term rentals. The investors who operate the Meadow Knoll and Bent Creek properties, who runs these houses, run 17 Airbnbs. You can go to the site, you just click on the investors, you open it up, they have a listing of 17. They own several properties in Hamilton County, they have separate businesses, they own their own LLC. All of this is not relevant in specific terms to this property, but it is a business. And in fact, if you missed it last year, these investors provided an online training called Short-Term Rentals 101. And they talked about how, and they did this to the Property Investors Network, and you could have learned how exciting and an evolving market can be extremely lucrative for property owners. My point, these are businesses, commercial activity being operated in our neighborhood, and I think it's extremely important for the board to understand that this is precedent setting tonight. Your decision tonight will be basically one of the following. One, you will decide that the Meadow Knoll property does not fit under a bed and breakfast, and you would allow continued operation unchecked. And this sends a public message that anyone could be free to conduct any activity, commercial or otherwise, that does not happen to fit squarely or perfectly within the exact definitions provided with the zoning resolution. This would take away any ability to review the spirit and intent of the residential district zoning and potentially negatively impact the families and neighborhoods. Or the board can uphold the bed and breakfast category designation and allow each of these short-term rentals to go through the predefined conditional use permit process, which is laid out by the zoning resolution, if they so choose. I suppose there is a third option where you can declare these short-term rentals as hotels and motels, and then therefore completely disallow them. But you have to be careful with the issue of making sure the zoning is best suited for the property owners. Just a reminder on Article 1 of the zoning resolution, your purpose is to uphold, this is for the purpose of promoting health, safety, morals, comfort, and general welfare of our communities. And so again, I know this meeting is specifically about, not specifically about this property, but is about short-term rentals. And for the purposes of zoning review, considering the bed and breakfast, that the majority of public concerns should be potentially be saved for future conditional use meetings, meaning this meeting tonight is not for us to complain about these things that are existing in our community, the three that exist right now, and the more, who knows? If the houses come up for sale, our concern is they're gonna turn into another hotel. I have a list of a page and a half of items that I will not go through tonight, because I'm saving that for a conditional use meeting. That's where that should be occurring. This is very clear tonight what you guys need to do. It is to uphold, hopefully, the bed and breakfast and/or change the category. You cannot leave, you have to assign a category, it's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but you have to assign a use. And it's not a single-family dwelling. It's not a single-family use. You have to assign something else tonight. Again, I'm not going to go through all my concerns, and I think this is probably the one of most, you notice how many people here. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing the zoning appeal meetings have not been this well attended in the past. But the reason why their people are here is because they have concerns. And so that's why these people are here, including myself. I would just ask you on a personal level, how would you feel if you had a property directly next to you where you have strangers, vacationers, partiers, whoever, coming in every 2 days? The concerns that you would have for the safety of your children or anybody else. There's a bunch of nuisances we've already occurred in our neighborhood because of these. So I've taken enough time, but please uphold, at least at a minimum, uphold the bed and breakfast category for the Meadow Knoll property and then therefore for the township. Thank you for your time.
My name is Kerry Kane. I live at 10120 Meadow Knoll, right next door to the property. We purchased our home in August of 2019. Our goal was to purchase a ranch home in a single-family residence community. Little did I know that a year later, the single-family home next door would transform into a 6-digit gross income light industry retail operation. Having lived next door, just the disputes, some prior discussion, it's not a regular rental property. Having lived next door, I've been able to observe, and I've kept track of how many people have been there and who's not. I have a spreadsheet here if anyone would like a copy of that, if you'd be interested in that. But the hotel / B&B, whatever you want to call it, at 112 Meadow Knoll has been rented to 50 different groups of people since mid-November of 2020. There's a single family is, or the zoning for the area is single family. 23 of those rentals involved 3 or more cars at the rental property, which means there's more than 2 families there, sometimes 3. There's been occasions where there's been 4, 5, 6, 10, 11 cars related to people staying there at the property. I've been able to keep track of all this stuff. I got a notebook every time someone comes and goes. I know what the car looks like that does the cleaning, so I know who's coming and going, new people coming in, new people coming out, different cars. So that's how I've been able to keep track of all this stuff. Again, the number of rentals that have been on a property that have had 2 cars are 23 out of the 50 rentals. So again, that's almost always more than one single family. It's generally 2 families, 3 families, all joining for a party. It's like the VRBO commercial where they say you need to come to a house to get together, to have everybody, 3 or 4 families get together and have a reunion, whether they're for family members or business people on training missions. It's been a mix of things. And to give some more detail on which was not able to be provided before on a number of people, number of days. There's been 17 of the renters have been 2 days or less out of the 50. 9 have been 3 days, 5 have been 4 days, and 5 for 5 days. So 72% of the rentals, of the 50 rentals, have been there 5 days or less. Yes, there was one person there that stayed for 52 days, one person for 26, 2 groups of people for 12 to 14 days, and 2 groups of people for 10 days. So it's a continuous churning of people coming and going, and you never know who they are. Beginning from May 28th of 2021, there have been 37 rentals for a total of 128 days of rental. It's an average of 3.5 days per rental. And often it's there's people coming and going within the same week. It's groups of people coming and going. When talking with Mr. Tucker last September, he asked me, why was I concerned? Why did it matter if there are different cars in the driveway each week? Implying that regular turnover of residents is consistent with single-family zoning. I don't think it is. The issue is not the different cars, but the people in the cars. And what are they doing? Ongoing uncertainty of how the next group of short-term transient vacations partiers will impact the safety and quality of the neighborhood is a serious concern. I've had to call the owners twice regarding noise, and I actually have a tape of that if you'd like to hear that at a different time. It's been kind of obnoxious. I've also had to contact the owners when they had a babysitter that was sitting in a driveway for 3 hours for the people that had rented the house because she couldn't get in. She had locked herself out and needed to get her cell phone. So you don't know who's going to be there. The renters are bringing their own staff. This is not a normal rental process. It's listed on Travelocity, it's listed on Airbnb, it's listed on VRBO, and as I said before, 72% of the 50 different people that have rented that in the last 14 months have been for 5 days or less. And since last May, the average has been 3.5 days. So there's a continuous churn of people that have been living there. So I know you guys have a hard job to do, but is it a B&B? It doesn't necessarily fit that definition, but based on what Brian was saying, but they needed to allow the property owners an avenue to be able to do this. That's why they put it in that. But it's really more like a hotel or an inn with people that can not necessarily related that are staying there. Most of the times they are, but it's not a requirement. There were business people staying there for 2 weeks while they were on a training session. So that's not a family. So it's operating more like a hotel than a B&B. And just, I know you have a tough decision to do. And if anyone would like my spreadsheet that highlights all the comings and goings and from each date period, I have copies for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the board. Thank you again for the hard work that you guys have in front of you here, and not envious of you guys. My name is Robert Ficari. I live at 10119 Meadow Knoll. So we are one house across the street and one house over from the rental property on Meadow Knoll. I know it's late in the evening, and I don't want to drag this on any further. But there's a lot of people who wanted to be here tonight, and they can't, and that's what I'm here to kind of speak for them. I've printed up just an aerial view of the neighborhood. The yellow one is the VRBO. I didn't have enough green or purple to label the other houses, so I kind of sprinkled them in for aesthetic reasons. But these are houses. Mine is right here across the street, another neighbor here. These all represent houses of families, single families, that have children under the age of 12 years old. From my driveway here, I can hit any of these houses with a Frisbee, to give you a kind of a scope of reference, and I don't have a very awesome throwing arm. There are 16 children under the age of 12. You know, I have a 2-year-old, I have a 4-year-old, I have an 8-year-old. My neighbor, one house over, he has a 1-year-old. We have lots of little kids, and this is a family area. These kids, you know, they play outside, they ride their bikes. There's lots of cars coming and going with this rental property. We know everyone in our neighborhood, and Mr. Trout mentioned several times that this property, you know, it's not complete strangers sleeping in the room next to us. That's exactly what it is for us. It's complete strangers. As Carrie said, every 3 days, there's someone new. We don't know who they are. And I didn't hear if background checks are done as part of the lease on this. I know back when I lived in a rental property, I actually had to do a background check before I was allowed to rent the space. I don't know who these people are. They're within 1,000 yards of the school. Is there any background check if there's a sexual predator? You know, we don't know this, and these are strangers coming into our neighborhood. As I said, there's a lot of young families that live near us, and they wanted to be here tonight, but they're at home with the kids. It's a school night, and it's now 8:30. But some of them did email me and asked me to read. And with your guys' permission, I know they're not able to. Okay. Well then, am I allowed to read what my wife has prepared, as she wanted to be here as well? Or can I just have to spitball from memory?
You're here to speak for yourself, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay. We have a dog. We have a invisible fence that goes around the property. We have seen people from the VRBO cross the street, cut through our yard to get to the high school, to play tennis, to play in the practice fields behind our yards. My kids play in our backyard. We have a swing set back there. Yeah, I don't know who these people are that are cutting through my property to go. You know, I don't know if it's advertised in VRBO that there's a high school nearby that they can get to, but there's no path. You know, if they want to get to the high school from here, they cut through my yard and get into the school. Again, this is a residential area with single families, and we all know each other, and we don't know who's coming into this house. And there's cars that are blocking the streets, driveways are full. It's a new set of characters every 2 to 3 days. It makes all of us uneasy. And you guys, not specifically this property you guys need to make a determination on, but this is going to affect every other family that lives near a house like that's being in this business model. It's an operation that's being run for profit and in a partnership between the two owners of this property. Again, I don't envy the position that you guys are put in, but please think of what message you are sending to the people of our township. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Chris Taylor. I'm the homeowner and resident at 10012 Bent Creek Drive. I live across the street from one of these Airbnb businesses that are being run in our neighborhood. In front of their house for 13 days. 13 days. 2 trash cycles just sitting out through there. What's that going to do to my property value? What kind of animals is that going to bring in to the facility? This has not been the first time that it's happened. We have garbage that is set out there for multiple weeks at a time, cardboard boxes blowing around our neighborhoods. This isn't what the community that I've signed up to come into. I'm concerned about the safety of my family. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I see the kids playing around in the neighborhood. Who's coming in? Are there sexual predators? We have no idea who these people are, right? I want to make sure that my family's protected. I want to make sure that my neighbors are protected. I want to make sure that my property values are protected and that this is a community that I'm proud to be part of. And when I see garbage floating around in my neighborhood, it's not something that I'm proud of. And it's not something I want to see. And part of what we're looking for this zoning committee to do is help protect us, right? And protect our rights and what we want to see within these areas. We have bus stops that sit right outside of this house. Who's going to be there when our kids are getting on and off the bus? Who's in that house? We don't know. right? So these, this is a bigger decision than just the Meadow Knoll property, because we are seeing more and more of this activity pop up. And what I'm seeing on my, thank you for your time.
Anyone else?
Good evening. Thank you all for taking this time as well. I know that this is, it takes a lot of your time to do this. Sorry, I'm better at written word than just winging it. So, good evening. My name is Ned Portune. I live at 1013 Colburn Court, 10113 Colburn Court. My property line, the back of my property line, half of my fence is directly adjacent to the rear of the property in question tonight, 10112 Meadow Knoll. Our backyard and their backyard view right into each other. I live there with my wife and my children. I'm here tonight simply to provide you our perspective and concern on this property and others like it as it relates to residential communities, both individually and collectively throughout Symmes Township. We chose this community to raise our children and built our house here in 1998. We chose the Oakton Place subdivision specifically because of its residential and family neighborhood characteristics. Over the past 24 years, it has proven to be everything that a family could have hoped for. A neighborhood of families, friends, where people know each other, look out for each other's children, pets, and homes. Neighbors are invested in their neighbors and their neighborhood. And as old neighbors move out and new move in, the cycle of community continues. Such is the nature of residential neighborhoods. But let's be clear, this issue tonight is not about family composition. We're talking about short-term rentals and rental businesses in residential communities. Transient lodging by its nature is opposed to all of the things that I mentioned. Short-term renters have no investment in their surroundings, their neighbors, or community, with the exception maybe of things that can directly cost them money or lose them their deposit. The building they're renting is not a home, it's a house. Its location is not a neighborhood, it's a street address. The people around them are not their friends or neighbors. They are prying eyes, an annoyance, and inconsequential. Airbnb, bed and breakfast, whatever you want to call it, this doesn't change based on a technicality of classification. A non-owner occupied house provides short-term occupants an assumed freedom to behave as they want without the heavy hand of management. Examples at this particular property include partying until 4 a.m., hanging out drunk and loud, not suitable for work language when all of the kids in the neighbor yards are out, and sitting out and smoking marijuana on the deck until all the other residents who live there had to go inside to avoid the smell. These are just a small sample of things that have happened over the past year. This happens when people have no investment in their residential community. Excuse me. For all of these reasons and more, I believe that the residents of our communities are owed at a minimum the process of having their input heard and being notified through the appropriate conditional use process, as is in agreement with the ruling of the zoning administrator. That's really all that I think anyone's asking for. Your decision will set precedent. We appreciate everything that you're doing, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Mitchell Schott. I live at 10051 Humphrey Road. My wife, 5-year-old daughter, and 3-month-old son. I've come here tonight to bring to your attention that another property in Symmes Township is being used as a short-term rental, and I don't believe has filed for a conditional use permit at this time. This property is located next door to our house with an address of 10047 Humphrey Road. This house was purchased in March of 2021 and renovated by an out-of-state investor. When the house did not sell, they began using it as a short-term rental in December of 2021. This house is being advertised on the Airbnb website as a 6-bedroom home that can comfortably sleep 20-plus guests, with other statements such as calling it a boutique hotel. It is obvious of the concerns I have with the house next door to me that is being used for large gatherings. There has already been 2 large gatherings on 2 separate occasions with 13-plus vehicles parked in the driveway in the front yard. I'm worried what the warmer months will bring for my family and my neighbors when these gatherings begin to spill outside. We currently have a beautiful, family-oriented neighborhood that is zoned single-family. Renting out a house and having it over-occupied does not fit the characteristics of our neighborhood. The regulation of short-term rentals must be addressed by the zoning committee by the way of a text ordinance that clearly sets rules and regulations for how to handle short-term rentals. Before this can be achieved, I ask that the board affirm the zoning determination of the conditional use of the short-term rental falling under the bed and breakfast category, which for now requires at least a conditional use permit. It is vital that we proceed with caution in order to maintain stability in our neighborhood, conserve our property values, and to protect the safety of all the residents that have chosen to live here. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm the last one. My name is Art Jarvis. I live at 10089 Meadow Knoll Drive. I am across the street and 2 or 3 houses down from the house that we're talking about. Most of these people have done a fantastic job saying what I would have already said, so I'm not going to repeat myself. The one thing I always say to people is the best decision my wife and I ever made was to move to this part of Cincinnati. Lived here all my life in Cincinnati. Lived at our house for 24 years. God willing, be there another 20 years. In my head, over the last 24 years, I'm pretty sure I've paid 6 figures in real estate taxes to things around here. So, and I'm not going to use the word that I'm happy to pay those, but I'm satisfied in paying those because we believe that we are getting a good return on our investment. We have a fantastic community. The people that are in our neighborhood, the ones that were originally there back in 1998, the new ones that have moved in with. One of the wonderful things about the neighborhood is the kids. There's been a huge turnover in the neighborhood. There's kids running around the street playing. There's a dozen kids in the field playing baseball and stuff. So not only have we had a great neighborhood, it has continued to be a great neighborhood. The neighborhood has an ebb and a flow, right? 24 years, and I'm becoming a little bit of a grumpy old man. You know, you feel things. Things are just normal in the neighborhood, okay? Things have not been normal in the neighborhood for a while. You see things going on, and, you know, like, for instance, there was a sports team in the front yard of that house that we're talking about. Back then, I was like, and 1 or 2 15-passenger vans sitting there. I looked up there, and, you know, my first impression is they must coach some kind of club sports team or something like that. They're getting ready to head off somewhere. But then there's other stuff. And as they talked about, it just keeps changing. There's all kinds of different people. And honestly, if my kids were young, I would be much more upset about what's going on. So to cut it short, again, I'm happy to pay the taxes I pay. I love the neighborhood we're in. But if this is going to be the way the neighborhood goes, I will go somewhere else, because that value, the value that I perceive, the law of averages, something bad is going to happen, okay? It wasn't that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, off of Ridge Road, there's Chatham Woods neighborhood. They had a brothel in their neighborhood. Those are $400,000 or $500,000 houses now. That was running a brothel out of the house, okay? So we live in a great neighborhood, but guess what? Stuff does happen, okay? And the more I had no idea that there had been 50 different people or groups there, okay? Honestly, I don't pay that close attention. Again, if you're having that much turnover, somewhere along the line, something good's not going to happen, okay? Also, the house that was just mentioned tonight, I didn't know what was going on with that house until you guys sent out the information to me. The 10007 Bent Creek. I drive past her almost every single day. Kind of scratch your head, what's going on, what's going on? Well, I found out tonight what's going on there. It's the same deal, okay? Again, it's for me, I'm an investment guy. It's what's the value, okay? If you start having these things come into the neighborhood, to me, the perceived value of that neighborhood is now, I would never buy in a neighborhood where there's Airbnbs or that kind of short-term turnover. So anyway, I spoke way longer than I meant to, but just thanks for, as everyone else said, thanks for your time, all right? And I guess I should ask that we make some adjustments, whatever that is, to put a stop to this, okay? Thank you.
Hi, I'll make this brief. I wasn't planning on talking tonight. My name is Laura Ansara. I live at 9979 Bent Creek Drive. It is the same street where of the other property of these owners that have are being talked about tonight, the owners of the Meadow Knoll property. I of course echo everything that has been said as a resident. I would like to give a little bit of perspective too, since I am a licensed realtor, my concerns about having an Airbnb, more than one in the neighborhood. Forgive me if you have extended knowledge about Airbnbs, but assuming that someone on the panel may not, the people that own these properties, they are property owners, but they are truly investors. And they are generally not interested in owning one or two properties. They are interested in acquiring multiple properties, and many times in the same neighborhood, because it makes it more convenient for them to take care of these properties when they are closer together. And also, if they're doing well in that neighborhood, of course, they're going to want to stay in that neighborhood because it's generating income for them. So how would you feel if there's not just one or two Airbnb properties in your neighborhood, but say a few years from now, 10% of the homes are Airbnbs? You see what I'm getting at? There's more denigration of property values and a perception of community in the neighborhood. There's also another thing. Our street also has a number of children that are under the age of 10, and we have a concern for their safety already with traffic of where we live in the neighborhood, and of course this is going to increase traffic in an already busy place where people who don't normally live there don't understand that, hey, I've got to watch out for kids on this street. Our neighbors know that. There are some that don't pay attention to it, but we've gotten more awareness now for people to pay attention to that. So that is a concern of mine. I also wanted to talk about property value. We know now it is a seller's market. It's a name your price kind of a market for sellers, but it's not always going to be that way. It's going to balance out eventually. We don't know when. And there's going to be a time where we may need to disclose as a realtor or as a seller, you may need to disclose that there is an Airbnb next door to you or across the street from you. No, it's not a law now, but even if it doesn't become a law, it's not going to be listed in MLS. The realtor may not tell a potential buyer, but you know who they're going to find out from? The neighbors, because most of the time when a prospective buyer is looking at a house, they talk to the neighbors to get more of a feel for the neighborhood. So I think, people, when we get into a more balanced market and you can't name your price, it's going to affect what we're going to get for our homes in Symmes Township, or even scaring buyers away completely. And then I would just like to put in the minds of everyone here is, what is our recourse if there are Airbnbs and there are continually problems by renters who have no ownership in the home? If we go to the owners and they do nothing about anything, I mean, their concern is their business, not about keeping the neighborhood happy. So, I'll view that as a rhetorical question. What's our recourse? I don't know what it would be. We'd basically have to live with it, I guess. So, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to stop here for a moment. We're about to go into deliberation to consider this issue, but I thought maybe we might have other questions for staff or the attorney present based on what you've heard that you might want to ask.
I don't have any questions. No, none to do left.
Mark?
Good.
No. I've got 100 questions, but I don't think I'll ask them. Okay, we're going to go into deliberations now. You get to be quiet and watch, and we get to make fools of ourselves. I think I'll start because I've been sitting here knowing that most of the testimony by our public audience has been off point because we're looking at an interpretation of the code. I think we should have been reading the code as opposed to listening, but it gives us good flavor for what we're looking at and discussing. So I think it reflects on what the staff was looking at when they were coming up with this interpretation, and it gives us a good color for it. So let's kind of go through it. We have a definition that they've provided us that is really, really relevant. We've all heard it. We've heard it from the applicant. We've heard it from the attorney for the staff. And let's see if I can just repeat it again. It was even in their letter, bed and breakfast, a private owner-occupied residence with 1 to 3 guest rooms, 1 to 3 guest rooms, not 4 guest rooms, 1 to 3 guest rooms contained within that structure and operated so that guests reside at the home for no longer than 2 consecutive weeks. No kitchen facilities may be provided for use by guests. We're deliberating now. I'm reading that, but I'm expressing my opinion. How in the hell can that possibly be considered an Airbnb? I can't see a bed and breakfast being an Airbnb. Not private owner occupied, totally rented out. Who knows how many guest rooms, limited here to 3. Operated so that guests reside in the home for not longer than 2 consecutive weeks. This Airbnb can be rented for a year. They're hanging their hat on the fact that a private homeowner can rent their house out for a year. They're hanging on their hat that they're in that same category, but can shorten that time frame because they're just like the homeowner who rents their house out for a year or much less than a year, a weekend or a day. No kitchen facilities? Are you kidding me? They couldn't rent it out if it didn't have kitchen facilities. It's not a bed and breakfast by definition. So the question becomes, what on earth is this? I want to look at a couple of other definitions in here. One of which is residential, single-family, detached. That's what we're talking about, isn't it? The structure that they're calling an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast is a single detached family home, structurally. A dwelling designed for and occupied by not more than 1 family. My first reaction to that phrase is, 1 family for how long? Do they mean residential single-family detached home as in just for the weekend? Or are they thinking of it as a longer-term issue? As that, for 1 family, as that term is defined in this article and surrounded by open space or yards in which has no roof or floor in common with any other dwelling unit. Well, the one word in there in that entire definition that's relevant, 1 family as that term is defined in this article. Family, a group or group of persons occupying a premises and living as a single housekeeping unit. Do you think an Airbnb customer for a weekend is occupying this as a single housekeeping unit? I don't think they're making the beds. distinguishing that from a group occupying a boarding house, fraternity, sorority house, hotel, or other type of, oh my God, other type of contractual living quarters. Isn't that what this is? Other type of contractual living quarters? Right after the word hotel? Let's go to hotel. A building containing more than 4 individual rooms for purpose, my house has more than 4 individual rooms, for purpose of providing for periods not exceeding 30 days. Well, they're talking about how much time? 30 days. Overnight lodging or facilities to the general public for compensation with or without meals, and which has common facilities for reservations and cleaning services, combined utilities and on-site management and reception. To me, this Airbnb is sounding a little bit more like a hotel. It may not be a single-family residential unit that fits the definition of a bed and breakfast, where you don't miss, you got 4 things wrong with that definition of a bed and breakfast. You got, well, 3 or 4 things wrong with hotel. It may not be either one, but it seems to me it's more like a hotel. 4 rooms? I got more than 4 rooms in my house. I'm just not operating it as an Airbnb. Occupying it for exceeding 30 days? Well, this is even less than 30 days. What is it that we're calling this Airbnb? I don't think you call it a single-family residential unit, detached or otherwise. I don't think you call it a family. I don't think it's necessarily a hotel, but it's closer to a hotel than a bed and breakfast. And when you get down to it, if you look at the zoning categories, we have a list of these. If you go to the index, the table of contents, we've got a AA residential district, we have an A residence district, an A2 residence district, a B, a B2, a C, a D, an O, and then you get to E. And when you get to the E residence district, by the time you've gotten there, you have read through all these pages, and each one of them lists single-family dwelling. Single-family dwelling, one after another, and you get to E, and it becomes something else that starts listing. I've lost, E is on what page here? 64? Yeah, 64. Single-family dwelling. It allows within the single-family dwelling category of an E district, single-family dwelling, two-family dwelling, multiple-family dwelling, attached condominium, boarding house, dormitory, fraternity or sorority, nursing, convalescent, and continuing care home facility, and then it lists the retail facilities that you can have under that, and they list bed and breakfast under E. So where does an Airbnb go? I don't know that it fits in any of those first ones as single-family dwelling, family units. If it goes anywhere, Airbnb in my mind goes somewhere under E residence district. That would be by definition, it's not there now, but if you were having to put it somewhere, I'd put it there. We're not being asked to amend the code here, but we are interpreting the code. I don't think Airbnb is what we've heard to tonight fits anywhere in all the other residential districts except maybe in E by what it's described. So I cannot accept, in my opinion, the interpretation of our staff that says it's a bed and breakfast. I would call it a commercial business enterprise that doesn't fit single-family dwelling, doesn't fit in any of those residential district codes, and however you define it, use any words you want, it doesn't fit. That's my view.
I agree that it doesn't fit, but what category do you want to put it under? Do you want to put it under, because we have to choose some sort of
I don't know that we do. They're saying they want us to. I say it's a commercial business activity. if you look at what Airbnbs are being done in the state of Ohio, they are being licensed and taxed and operated as businesses. This is, in my judgment, this is no different than taking a single-family house in any subdivision in Symmes Township and making it a used car lot or an automobile repair facility. This business is just being conducted within the four walls and under the roof. It's a commercial business.
So where does the longer-term residence, like with multiple leases, multiple months, where does that currently sit in regards to our code? I mean, if I'm going to rent out my house or your house for 12 months to somebody, where does that currently fit?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that the code does, but our attorney might be able to tell us. We think of renting out houses as the homeowner renting it out because he's now living somewhere else and he's making money off of it. It's a business activity, but it's not the generating gigantic business enterprise.
Just because it's not incorporated or LLC, it's still a business enterprise.
It's definitely a business enterprise.
Oh, well, I don't know this.
About that.
Yeah. Okay, it's a matter of what you mean by the term, but okay.
I just was asking the question.
I understand.
To whether if you're renting it for 12 months, 3 months, or 6 months, where does that stand in regards to the code? That's just my question. I mean, you may not have the answer, maybe.
Maybe our attorney does, but as a general background matter,
you could make a possible culpable argument.
Yeah,
it could fit into that category, possible.
Yeah, I mean that's the argument that the property owner is making.
Well, I'm saying do I agree with that argument? What I'm saying is, I agree with what you're saying completely. I don't see any category.
I don't see a category
where this
either.
specific.
But you have to remember what the categories are. The category about bed and breakfast is all about conditional use. It's not a granny house. It's not a bed and breakfast either. I can't support the interpretation that this is a bed and breakfast. In the same way, it's hard to call it a hotel. So does it have to already have another category other than being a commercial enterprise?
I don't think it has to.
Yeah.
I think your initial, question to the zoning representative was that it's just business. It's just a business, and it needs to qualify and fall under that category.
That's what I think. It's hard for us to say, oh, we're writing the code and this is how it fits, or this is
the code.
Right, we can't, exactly. We're interpreting the code. And it's hard for us to flip through 100 pages trying to figure out where's that definition. And I don't find it, but it ain't a bed and breakfast.
Well, since us old people are going first here, I'll keep it going. I am going to be somewhat opposed to that view. I don't think that there's any good place to put a short-term rental. I don't see any of that. I do think moving forward that if there are going to be Airbnbs, and I think people will have the right to buy property, do a lot of things that they want to do with it. But I don't think that they should be able to do it unchecked. And having a conditional use makes them come before a board, a group, get some sort of approval from someone somewhere that says, hey, this could be a brothel. No, that's not allowed. Those types of things. And that's part of what zoning does. So I think moving forward, specifically here, I don't like the definition of the bed and breakfast. Honestly, to me, it seems like that's a very generous definition where they were trying to be generous to the property owners and say you can come and get this conditional use variance if you want that. So I'm not opposed to calling it a bed and breakfast or putting it in that category at all.
Well, let's dialogue with that. We know that you guys are all kind of new to this, so we'll do the fighting with each other part.
My line of thinking is pretty much on my feelings. I look at the Article 1, which someone referenced in terms of the whole purpose behind this is for the purpose of promoting health and safety and morals and comfort and general welfare of the residents of the community. And, just listening to the testimony that was shared today and thinking about the purpose for why people move into the community, I really look at the importance of having a process that checks and ensures that there's some compatibility with the use of any unit within the community.
Go ahead.
I don't know how relevant this is, but I remember a quote from Chief Justice Stewart when he says, "I cannot define pornography, but I know what it looks like."
Yeah.
And in this case here, it may be difficult to define it with what is written, but from what I've heard from both sides, it is an Airbnb. I believe it can be used as Airbnb, and it should require some type of conditional licensing for it to be. The homeowner has the choice whether or not it wants to be an Airbnb. But if you just want to have residential property, why put it on a website advertising it as an Airbnb? Put it on a Zula or put it on a, but to me, there's enough that I see that it can be and has been used as an Airbnb. And I think there's, I don't know how relevant that is, but I can't maybe find it, but I know what it looks like.
Really helpful insight, because that sort of goes without saying, and it's nice to focus on it for a moment. Let me give you my reaction to that. We don't carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. That's not our job. Our job is to, tonight, interpret the code as we see it and classify this property thing the way we think it fits. If it fits, it doesn't have to fit. There are other possibilities here. Our township needs to look at this issue. I was stunned to find that there's not just one Airbnb in our neighborhood. I was stunned to hear there are several. And that there's a property owner out there that owns several in our subdivision. Now, I happen to know that if you go to over the Rhine, there are a lot of Airbnbs. If you go to the city of Cincinnati, they have a code for the Airbnbs. So does Columbus, so does Cleveland. We're apparently a small town, so to speak, a small township, behind the curve in addressing this issue, not knowing that we have so many of these Airbnbs in our own community. We can regulate that. The township can. This board can't. The township trustees, it's their job to police the Airbnbs, not us to say, well, we're going to call it a bed and breakfast so we can regulate it. That is not our job. Our job is to say, is it a bed and breakfast? Is it just a word? I don't think it's just a word. I don't think it fits that definition. I don't think it really fits the definition of a hotel. I don't think it has a definition in our code. I think we tell them, our staff, that their interpretation is wrong. It is not a bed and breakfast. We then go home and say, I hope my township administrators regulate this thing, pass an ordinance, and say, as some little townships have across Ohio, well, put it in the same category as a bed and breakfast. They've done it. We wouldn't be the first. Treat it the same way. But right now, the definition of bed and breakfast does not fit. I don't think we can say it does, because we're lying to ourselves to get the result we want. That's my view.
That's where I stand.
Yeah.
That's where I stand.
Yep.
So I don't like it.
Right.
But I have to look at what the code says.
Right.
I can't
And we tell
I can't
them.
make up something that.
Right.
It isn't.
Don't make your ruling based on the result you want in real life. The job is at the township. the legislators. And we've been told by our staff that they're working on it. They should work a little faster. They've got more in the community than we knew.
But we're just dismissing what the inspector went through. I mean, in his opinion, and from the cases and examples, that this kid is being used as an Airbnb, correct?
Yeah.
So we're dismissing his experience, his expertise, by saying that, you know, we go against his decision.
We're reading the same code. It's your judgment about what the code is.
And
You
he
could
is al- he
be,
is
you could
also
be
too, right?
deferential
He is
to their
also-
interpretation.
He also knows what the code is.
Understood. I understand entirely. And we each make an individual judgment here and vote our own judgment. My judgment, my vote will be, it is not a bed and breakfast. I don't see it in the words, and I think the staff was trying to reach a result that they can administer more easily. When I think the job is for the trustees to pass something and deal with Airbnbs, regulate them. What they've done in the city of Cincinnati is they've imposed a special tax on them, or imposed a business tax on them like others do. They regulate them, they require certain amounts of insurance and all kinds of other requirements that should be administered. That's not our job.
And if you take that to like another level, you know, that would provide the community at whole more protection than just
Correct.
a basic use.
That's something I thoroughly agree with.
So
Now, I've dominated this discussion and don't mean to, so you've heard everything I think about it. You got, the four of you can talk among yourselves, or say, I've heard enough that I think I can make a vote of my own. But remember, the choices are three. We agree with that interpretation. We disagree with that interpretation. It's not that. Or we come up with something else. I can't come up with something else that I see in the code.
So you're not saying that it should be hotel motel definition?
Well, it could as easily as be as a bed and breakfast. Well, let's go back to hotel. Let's look at what that definition is again.
Is that zoned E? That was actually one of my questions.
What?
Hotels and motels, are those
Zone
conditional
E.
use, or are
Zone
they
E.
zoned E?
E.
E. So
Right.
then they would have to be before the.
But bed and
township.
breakfast is also in E.
Okay.
Hotel or motel, a building containing more than 4 individual rooms. Most single-family homes do. Nope.
That would qualify.
Right, that qualifies so far, for the purpose of providing for periods not exceeding 30 days. We've almost kind of heard that Airbnbs tend on average to be under 30 days.
Right.
We heard the one Airbnb owner said, well, probably at least 12. And we're hearing that it's a lot less than that in other cases. Overnight lodging to the general public, publicly advertised, for compensation, absolutely. With or without meals, well, yeah, you don't have to use the kitchen. It's gone 100% so far, and which has common facilities for reservations. Well, I don't know about the building having that, but the owner's providing that, the manager's providing that, cleaning services. Like I said, I don't think those B&B residents are making the beds the day they leave. Combined utilities and on-site management, I don't know about that, and reception. But yeah, there's going to be somebody on site who gives them the key and lets them in. Maybe it's a hotel.
Can we vote what we feel either for the inspector's decision or against the inspector's decision? But can we vote either way with recommendations to the Board of Commissioners and say, hey, we've got a lot of vagueness here, we need to tighten it up, we need to be more clear and more specific. Can we do that? Can we?
Absolutely, you can.
Unless
council tells us you can't.
You can make that statement outside of your
Right, it's
action
not-
on this case. You
not-
cannot include that in your motion or vote on that tonight. No.
But you can make a public statement on that.
As a statement of the board completely separate from this case, yes.
If I was issuing a decision tonight, to put it under the hotel motel classification.
I might be too.
I mean, that would be a much
Yeah.
cleaner way to
Right.
interpret it, that I could.
I was kind of turned around when I read that just now.
That you could
Yeah.
do the definition.
Right. Gary, let's go back to your suggestion. We can do what you want to do in 2 steps. We can vote our ruling in step 1 without making the recommendation to the board as part of the ruling. Then separately in our agenda, we can pass a resolution recommending to the trustees strongly recommending the trustees that they adopt an ordinance or a specific language in the code for Airbnbs.
Why couldn't we, if we decided amongst each other to just change the classification to hotel motel instead of bed and breakfast?
Eh?
I mean,
Give them his space a second. They've told us twice, you can interpret it what it is.
Right.
They're saying interpret it as a B&B, bed and breakfast, and we don't think it is. If hotel fits, we can tell them. Airbnb fits as a hotel, if you get majority vote here.
Right, that's what I'm saying. We can either accept, reject, or
Modify, absolutely.
Right, so
And modify is hotel,
that
right?
modify as hotel.
If you can get,
Hotel and motel.
if you can get 2 more of us to agree with that, you got it done.
That still provides the spirit of what I guess they were trying to establish. You know, the use.
That goes back to, I think, my interpretation of all this is.
That statement, but it's saying that's what thing. We don't want to just legislate a decision for the purpose of making a decision.
I'm trying to get away from legislating.
Right.
I want the trustees to do the legislating.
Right.
I have this thing that's eating at me, okay, and I'll open it up and tell you. Okay, I'm not saying that an owner of a residence cannot do this, or this. But I'm saying is, if you were truly aware of what's happening here in Symmes Township, of what the categories are, and if you choose as an owner of a private property and you want to use it as rental property, why not get the condition or the license to avoid this? This all could have been avoided very simply. Okay, I want to use an Airbnb. What would I have to do? There's some additional licensure that you have to do. Then do it. You know, why go through this? It just seems like it's so unnecessary. Just do what's available out there. I just don't think that you private owner really did much research and just use this as, hey, I can make some money, commercial property, and they have a right to, but every community has its own standards. And why didn't they follow it? By getting the right licensure.
Welcome to the party, Gary.
Okay, and that's what's bothering me, you know. Why?
This has got to be one of the most interesting
It is.
issues they've ever had to bring before us. You'll go to meetings from now on and just go, oh, they just want to build a swimming pool. How wonderful. You'll
How did the neighbors feel?
Yeah.
Do they have a fence?
So you've got a real challenge here tonight, and
So if we choose to modify and go with the hotel definition, will that still require a public hearing and the steps necessary to further that?
well, remember now, you're implying what's the result I want as to what, but think about the definition. Are you satisfied with the definition in itself? Because that's really what we're being asked to do. We're not being asked to legislate. We're not asked to being ruled that they can or they can't.
But I don't think there's any problem with asking what the consequences of fine. You're asking to modify something, and then you don't want us to ask what the consequences
Well,
are.
we're not in the job of modifying. I think we're in the job of interpreting the code. Is this a bed and breakfast? We think it's not. Some of us think it's not. Do some of us think it's a hotel? Well, perhaps it is. Perhaps we think it's a hotel. We can say that's what we think this use is a hotel. It's a poor choice of words, but when you read the definition of hotel, it fits it. This is Merriam-Webster's dictionary. It's this definition of hotel. So I think that's a reasonable result, is to interpret it as a hotel. Just reach that result because that's how you read it, not that it gets you the result you want. That gets into, in my view, legislating, which is the job of the elected trustees, not an appointed board, where all we have is one little step ahead of everybody in the audience. We've got just that much more authority. They vote, we vote publicly on election day. We're not much more decisive than that. The trustees are the ones who have been given the confidence of the community to make these decisions. Let them legislate it. Let us interpret it. If you think it's a hotel, we can vote it's a hotel. We could even vote first, do we think it's a B&B? Then we could vote, if we don't think it's not, we can vote, is it a hotel? And if it's not, then we can say, is it a commercial business of some kind? And say, that's all we know. Throw it back in their lap. We're not the trustees. My view.
I'm gonna be more informal and more how our meetings normally go. Hey, Brian. A hotel motel, is that a conditional use?
No, it would require a zone change, so all of the ones that are in single-family neighborhoods would have to stop operating as Airbnbs, and they wouldn't be able to get a retail zone approved in the middle of a neighborhood likely, so nobody would be able to do them.
What did he say?
It would have to be rezoned. The individual property would have to be rezoned. So
It can't be
you'll have
run as a
home,
hotel.
You'll have it zoned as a house, and then you'll have this special zoning for this one house that is commercial in theory.
That's a
generic
You can't do
category,
spot
like-
zoning.
That's why I said that you won't be able to do them.
Right, okay.
Because then once that business leaves, what stops some other business from coming in and slippery slope and all that kind of stuff?
All right. Stop nodding, everybody. Do you want to vote on something? Now, no.
I'm ready to vote.
I'm ready to vote.
I'm ready to vote.
What do you like to vote? We usually take it
Gentlemen.
informal, consensus, make a motion.
I'd like to vote to determine whether this is or is not a bed and breakfast.
So
Okay.
your
You have a second?
your motion needs to be in the affirmative in some fashion. You
Right.
need to make a motion.
It is or it isn't?
I'd like to make a motion to see whether this is or is
No,
not.
no,
No.
you're saying, I make a motion that this is a bed and breakfast, or I make a motion that it is
No.
not a bed and breakfast.
Hold
Hold
on.
Hold on.
I think we were just doing an informal poll on.
Yeah.
Right, I don't know that it's, you can't
make a
do
motion
that.
to an informal
Right,
poll.
right. If the board is ready to make any kind of decision, I would just, let me step back and remind you, here's your role, here's this board's role tonight. You can reverse the interpretation of the zoning administrator. You can affirm the interpretation of the zoning administrator, or you can modify the determination of the zoning administrator. And that's how your motion would be formulated. I make a motion to, affirm the determination of the zoning administrator, or I make a motion to reverse the decision, the determination. That's how the motion would be formulated, because that's your role in this case,
Okay,
as
so
this board.
Let's put it into plain English for a second. If I say affirm, we're agreeing it's a bed and breakfast.
Mhm.
If I say, what was it?
Reverse.
Reverse it, we're simply saying it's not a bed and breakfast.
I would encourage you not to reverse the decision. I mean, you have the authority to, but I would.
We're we're making our own decisions here. Let's go back to that. I could reverse it and say it's not a bed and breakfast, or I can modify it. And by modifying it, we are saying that the ruling of the staff was that it is a bed and breakfast. We're modifying that to mean the ruling of the staff, the code interprets a bed and breakfast, I'm sorry, the code is interpreted to say that a Airbnb is a hotel. That's modifying the conclusion that an Airbnb is a bed and breakfast. Is that a modification?
Yes, that would be a modification of the,
Repeat that again.
Feel free.
Repeat that again.
Pardon?
Repeat that again. And you said, repeat that again, please.
Okay.
What you just said.
Well,
The modified.
The modified.
The modified section. The last one.
maybe this will help. If you're looking at the staff report,
Yeah.
the very end of the staff report has a section that says board's action. Okay? And it says the board is to decide whether to reverse or affirm, wholly or partly, or modify the determination of the administrative official that short-term rental uses shall be included in the use category of bed and breakfast for purposes of zoning administration in Symmes Township. Sorry to read that, but that's the whole thing. We are talking about the determination that short-term rental uses shall be included in the category of bed and breakfast. If you make a motion to affirm that determination, you are agreeing that short-term rental uses should be considered as bed and breakfast for zoning.
Should be, but that's what the.
Yeah, that's the interpretation.
Right.
If you modify it, you could modify the determination to say that short-term rental uses shall be included in the use category of, and this board would fill in the blank with whatever you want to put in a motion, for purposes of zoning administration in Symmes Township. You do have the authority to reverse it, but what I'm going to say, and I think Brian was about to say it, is if you reverse it only, what you're saying is short-term rental uses will not be included in the category of bed and breakfast, but it provides no other guidance or interpretation for staff.
Thank you, Jeff. That was what I was going to say.
Yep.
You're the new
No, I
guy.
mean, I'm prepared to, you know.
Of the three, I'm sure of one I don't want. It's the other
And
two.
I think everybody's on board with that. I think that the
There's one
question
I
is
don't
more, do we affirm partly and modify the remainder? I think that's maybe more than what the concern is with the consensus of the group. But one of the other ways to do that is to throw out a motion and pass or fail, and there'll be more discussion, and then you can make another motion at that time.
I mean, I would put out a motion to, I don't have the exact wording, because I don't have the actual decision in front of me, but to modify the interpretation of the zoning, I guess.
Administrator.
Zoning administrator.
To modify it in what respect?
To modify it to put short-term rentals in the category of hotel motel.
Okay. Is there a second? Does anybody second that motion?
Can't hear you.
What?
Can't hear it again.
I'm putting out a motion to modify the interpretation made by the zoning administrator to put the definition of short-term rentals in the category of hotel motels. That's my motion.
Okay.
And that's the third option.
Partially
That's the
affirming.
third option.
And so you would
Is
need
there
a second.
Okay. For the moment you're standing alone. Let's try a different one. I'll make a motion. Making a motion doesn't define my vote, does it?
No, it does not.
So
There's
just-
nothing to vote on until there's a motion and a second.
To clarify
I
that.
move
Never mind.
that we affirm the interpretation of the zoning administrator of Symmes Township to interpret short-term rentals such as Airbnbs as a bed and breakfast. Is there a second for that motion? You
I got a
second?
second.
You second that? Okay. And you second that?
Kevin B.
Okay. It's been seconded. All in favor?
The motion was to affirm the determination of the zoning administrator that short-term rentals such as Airbnbs would be included in the use category of bed and breakfast.
Okay.
That's
So,
the motion, and there was a second.
Luann?
Who seconded it?
Here.
Kevin?
Joel did too.
Kevin B. You get credit.
I did not second it, by the way.
What?
We got a second and a third out of this. Don't worry. Joel and Gary
The
both
motion
second.
is to affirm the interpretation.
Yep.
And we're ready?
Go for it.
Ms. Harlow? No. Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Mr. Deutsch?
No.
Mr. Jameson?
Yes.
Mr. Fowler?
No.
Well, the motion fails. Requires 3 affirmative votes.
So one of the things that we've been talking about is what exactly is a short-term rental? Is that a 30-day? That's my stickler for the motion was just, are we making it, I think somewhere in there we have to say short-term rental is defined by a 6-month non-continuous or continuous rental type thing. Am I defining that? That sounds right. So
I don't think we can define short-term rental. I think there's no definition.
there is no short-term. Yeah, I know.
What are you interpreting?
I know.
What's it say?
It says, I am not a trustee, but I do think that even changing it to hotel motel, I think is still legislating to an extent to that one.
I'm worried about that too, but when I read it, it was a little scary. How it fit.
So we don't have any definition, and I think that is one way to convey to the trustees as well. After we sat here and listened to all the testimony of residents, people who live here, work here, play here, those kinds of things, of what they want. So that's where I'm coming from. I think it would be a guide, and
Oh, you
they're
need
not
to-
going to do anything.
you guys need to
with it
turn and
there.
use the
Oh,
microphones.
sorry. We're
Let's
just
go-
saying
let-
that you guys are all wonderful, and we're thrilled that you guys came out and hung out with us tonight.
I
We're not
can't
normally
believe
this
you're
excited.
still here, by the way.
Exactly.
I can't believe we're still here either. Let's go back to the interpretation. What happened? I didn't like the idea that we were voting for a result as opposed to interpreting. But what were you saying to us? What happens if we vote that this is rejected? We have not affirmed it. It's either reject or modify at this point. What is a simple rejection? Because we could very easily make a motion to reject it. I'm just wondering what you were saying that meant.
If the board's decision is to reject the determination or interpretation of the zoning administrator, then what you're saying is that short-term rentals do not fall under the use category of bed and breakfast, but you are not providing any other interpretation or guidance for staff. So what we will be left with is a similar situation of where we are now, which is where are we supposed to, where do we consider short-term rentals in the zoning code?
You will still go unchecked, essentially.
Isn't that wrong? Isn't that not the case? You'd be looking back at the code. You're now looking at, not bed and breakfast, it's not a granny thing,
No,
it's not
no,
a conditional use.
that's not the case. What Mr. Forbes stated is exactly correct. We had no guidance. We looked through the entire code. We looked through every definition, every category in every district, and using our attorneys, your township administrators, and my zoning experience came up with this interpretation based on the best knowledge that we had and the best fit that we could find for this use, because there was no place for it, clearly. There was no definition that fitted exactly, as you're finding out by reading all the definitions that you're reading, which we did. There's no clear place for that to go.
Well, what is that, how is
So
it
if
different
there is
than
no
being a
guidance,
commercial business?
if there's no guidance, the owner of the Airbnb is going to argue what they're arguing, that it's single family. We try to categorize it as bed and breakfast, but it was overturned by the Board of Zoning Appeals, so we can't do that anymore. We would have to come up with a new interpretation, and I'm not sure what that would say.
You know,
But it would have to, it would still be constrained by the exact same things we're here before today. It would have to pick a category to administer that use.
Do we want to try the motion of hotel reinterpretation and see if that passes?
I thought we just did that with that.
No, all we did was reject the bed and breakfast.
There was a motion for that. It failed for a lack of second.
Right.
Right. Oh, there was a motion for hotel and it had, oh, that's right.
And there was no second.
Well, that doesn't keep it from being re-raised, does it?
Oh, someone can introduce that motion again, but until it gets a second.
See, if we can't modify it, we just go back. The choices are rejection and leave it back to them, or try the hotel thing. Do we want, we can try the hotel thing one more time and then do a rejection motion. Or if, we haven't thought of any other categories. I'd reinterpret it as a commercial business. I would think that you can't be a commercial business run in a single-family district. Maybe we can use that one. I'd say I'd interpret, this is a commercial business. And see if that's permitted in single-family districts. Now they're trying to figure out what to tell them.
So I am comfortable affirming, I'm comfortable affirming the administrator's position, except modifying the use category to hotel motel. If we call this a short-term rental, and it's determined by, a short-term rental is determined by 6 months in a day of continuous rental. Is that
Shorter
something
than.
that is, what?
Shorter than 6 months.
And while that definition would not be code, it's a starting point from nowhere. I feel like we're all grasping at straws.
You want to repeat that as a resolution?
No, I will tell you, my concern with that is that now you are, by defining it, you are doing the more legislative function that is not the role of this board.
Hotel is 30 days in the definition now.
I still think hotel motel is the best
fit
for the definition. I think that's the best fit. So, I'll make the motion again, in regards to that.
I'll second it this time.
So, I'm making a motion in regards to the zoning professionals' interpretation to modify their determination to suggest that it would be considered short-term rental, be considered a hotel rental.
I second the motion.
You ready?
Ready?
Go.
Mr. Trick,
Can I have the motion repeated again?
I'm making a motion to modify the zoning commissioner's interpretation to such that short-term rentals would be considered under the hotel motel definition of the zoning use category.
So we are saying, the inspector, you classified it in error. It should have been in the report, designated as a hotel, not an Airbnb. That's what we're saying.
Yep. That's the first one
And if
failed.
it is classified as a
Wait.
hotel,
Oh, yeah, you're right.
then
No, the firm one
needs to be
passed. The one the modified
regulated.
failed because it never got seconded.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So don't I have to do a motion to ignore this one?
No.
So in a residential neighborhood, can that be rezoned, can that private property be rezoned as a hotel?
I don't know the answer to that.
What does our?
I can, as Brian stated, it's almost impossible that this property is zoned, the one we're talking about, and most of these is in a, residence B district. To do a hotel or motel, it would have to be rezoned to, is it E or O? Yeah.
Does that rezoning process start here, or does it go?
This board has absolutely nothing to do with the rezoning process.
That's right. That's done by the zoning commission and recommendation to the trustees, who then legislate.
The other committee, the zoning board, does that.
Luann?
Oh, you
We'll
ready?
start the roll call.
We're voting on modifying, right? Okay. Mr. Trick,
Aye.
Mr. Deutsch,
Yes.
Mr. Jameson,
Yes.
Mr. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Harlow.
Yes.
That motion passes with 5 affirmative votes.
Can you hear from the audience now?
If you like.
That's up to the chair. I mean, the case has been decided.
Feel free. This is a public hearing. The input of the public is welcome.
Well, the
Oh,
public hearing portion is over.
we are past that point. Let us get to kind of adjournment for a moment. Let me get back to the script here. Okay, we've heard BZA 2021-01. Old business, we have none. New business, do we have any?
I'll do it. Start on it tomorrow.
It's up to you first.
Yeah, we can't approve any minutes.
10 days. Right, yeah.
Do you have any new business for us?
No, I do not.
Do you have any administrative matters?
Well, the minutes needed to be approved.
We
but
can't
don't
approve
have
any
3
minutes, we don't have a
right.
quorum.
The only other thing I was going to bring up is how you wanted your materials before the meeting. We used to always send them in the mail. But we're not
Yeah, what
getting-
happened
But we're
here?
not getting big plans anymore? Well, because of Zoom, we had to do it through
Yeah.
email because, you had to be home to, everything was electronic.
Let's
But we don't
go.
get the big plans like we used to. I know years ago, people said they wanted to see the big plans.
Yeah, I remember how
And we don't
important
get
that
them
is.
any, we haven't hardly gotten any big plans.
Let me talk to the board for just a second.
Okay.
I think what you're trying to say is you want to just distribute by email.
It's up to you if you prefer
Well, but I,
the old-fashioned way.
right,
I
we
would
have a preference. I live a quarter mile. I go walking through the commercial district right there, that commercial area. I'm a walk from where the township is. Are you all close enough that you could stop by and pick up any printed materials if you wanted printed materials?
Yes.
There's some expense involved in mailing it out to us, and they've done it for years. They've never asked us to do it any differently. They've always mailed the stuff to us, and I've always said, I'll come pick them up. I'll save you the postage. We could all just say, send it to us an email. If we want them, we'll come ask you to print them out copies for us.
I agree.
Okay?
I like to send an email.
Pardon?
Send an email.
Oh, yeah, no, send an email, but if we call her and say, we'll come pick it up, we want to see the paper,
There are
we
some
can do
plans we
that.
get where it's the huge papers.
Does that work for you, Luann, or do you need to call the roll?
I like electronic.
No, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
I know
Electronic too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have for administrative matters.
Okay. We're adjourned. Now, does somebody want to say